And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome everyone to Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs. It's me, Jamie Franklin. I'm going to be with you for the next little bit of time talking about the biggest stories in church and state. If this is your first time or if you've forgotten, this podcast is a podcast where I, as a vicar, sometimes with my vicar friends, Tom and Daniel, who are not around this week for various reasons, talk about big stories that somehow are relevant to the church and to Christianity, but really, stories out there in the world, sometimes political stories, sometimes stories which are internal to the church, and sometimes other things, sometimes funny things. That's what we do. And hope to anyway provide a Christian perspective on this. We are Church of England. We're not really into the woke thing, if we're honest. We're more sort of traditional Anglicans in that sense of different types. I personally am an Anglo-Catholic, but Tom and Daniel, they've got their own approach as well. So that's kind of a bit what the podcast is. So I'm going to get to it, and I'm just going to be talking. It's a monologue this week. That's essentially what it is. I can't put another spin on it. I can't pretend there's another person here, because there simply isn't, apart from the Holy Spirit, of course, who is very much a person, one of the three persons of the Trinity. Anyway, here we are, Irreverent. I feel like I'm going to sneeze, which is terrible, because I don't even have anything to, catch my sneeze. Do you ever get that when in the summer months you feel a bit sneezy? I think lots of people say, it's hay fever, but I really don't think it is. Anyway, let's begin. Before we start, I'd like to just give a notice. I'm going to be doing a live interview with David Lord Frost, the famous diplomat and Brexit negotiator, now writer in the Telegraph and so on. I'm going to be doing a live interview with him. And basically what that is a podcast recording of a live interview that's happening in my church. That's going to be on Thursday, September the 18th in the evening. And there will be drinks and refreshments after that. So you get a chance to meet other listeners, meet Lord Frost, meet me, if that's interesting to you. And then that podcast, which will have a question and answer bit at the end, that will then be later broadcast on this podcast. So if you see what I mean, it's kind of like a podcast recording, which you are there to watch and participate in to a certain extent, drinks afterwards, and then everyone will be able to actually listen to the interview itself later on. So if you're interested in that and you want to come along, please do come along, because it'd be great to see. I'm looking forward to seeing lots of listeners there, hopefully. And I will leave the, I may have forgotten to do this before, and I'm really sorry if I did, but I'll leave the internet address, the website address, where you can buy tickets. I didn't say that very well. Maybe it's because I'm slightly sleep deprived today. I'll leave a link for where you can buy tickets to this event where I'm going to be interviewing Lord Frost, Thursday, September the 18th. Hope to see lots of you there. Link below. If this is the video you're watching, link below. Also, if this is a podcast you're listening to, I should say. Right, there we go. That's the notice. Finished. Now, this day, we are going to be talking about Kemi, Badenoch and the problem of evil. We are going to be talking about wokery on the BBC in the form of Krish Kandaya appearing on Thought for the Day. It's quite an interesting one. An update on our friend Bernard Randall, really sad story there. An update on how the selection for the Archbishop of Canterbury is going slowly. A bit on the new Archbishop of Wales, who is a lesbian who lives with her civil partner and their two cats, and a little bit about the closure of the Spurgeon's training college, which is really sad. Another sad thing. So, pardon me, it's not really very positive this week. So let's start with a suitably challenging portion of scripture. I just take this because it's I'm preaching on it this weekend on Sunday, and I think it's quite apt for the tone of this show. So Luke chapter 12, verse 49, these are the words of Christ. I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on in one house there will be 5 divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Okay, so there are various things we might want to ask here. When Christ talks about casting fire on the earth and would that it were already kindled, and I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Most commentators see in this an allusion to his death upon the cross, his rising again, his ascension, and his sending the Holy Spirit upon the church. And it seems to be a very straightforward reading of it. He's talking about his death. The baptism is his death. Baptism is about being immersed in something, baptizo, which means to be immersed. So it's not the sacrament of baptism he's talking about. He's talking about how he's going to be overshadowed by the power of death, essentially. And casting fire upon the earth, it's a very powerful image. It's an image of the gospel. It's an image of the Holy Spirit. What does fire do? Well, it burns, it consumes, it purifies, it makes alive, it warms, it gives fervor, and so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of connotations that go along with all of that stuff. But I think really the heart of this passage is where he says, do you think I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. Not peace on earth, but rather division. And many people look at that and say, well, I thought the Christian faith was all about peace. Doesn't that bit in, the Christmas readings, doesn't that talk about peace on earth and goodwill towards men? Actually, it doesn't. It's a mistranslation. What's all this stuff about division? We're constantly told that unity is a good thing and that unity is a Christian virtue and so on and so forth. Doesn't Christ say, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you? Doesn't the Apostle Paul talks about the peace that passes all understanding and so on and so forth? In a sense, all of that is very true. The way I would explain this is that I would say that Christ does offer peace to the world. He offers peace in relation to himself, essentially. So if we are in communion with Christ, if we know Christ, he offers us his peace. And if we are in the fellowship of the church with other people who know Christ, then we have peace with one another. We can have peace in that relational and harmonious sense that's offered in the church. What Christ is speaking about here is he's speaking about the division that exists within humanity over the question of who he is, who is Christ. And what he says is obviously borne out by the fact that he was rejected and killed upon the cross, but the way that his followers have been persecuted and rejected ever since, as a result of their profession of faith in Christ. And this rejection and this persecution and this division continues to this day. And it's a salutary word to hear in the church, particularly in the Church of England, where we are constantly told that unity is a value that must be placed alongside the value of truth, or even above it. That unity in the church is something which is more important even than truth. And I just don't see that. I see unity as something that comes as a byproduct, as a fruit of faithfulness to Christ and of following his teachings and his commandments. I just think it's just absolutely clear that the New Testament says this over and over again. And, actually, the other day I was reading in the lectionary, I'll just share this with you, something from 1 Corinthians, which I'd never actually noticed before. And see if I can just find it, just because it came to my mind. Where is it? Yes. Here, when he's talking about the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians 11, the Apostle Paul says, for in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you, and I believe it in part. For there must be factions among you, in order that those who are genuine among you must be recognized. For there must be factions among you, in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. It's really interesting, isn't it? And that's in the context of the Lord's Supper and some people taking it wrongly and some people taking it rightly. The New Testament knows nothing of this idea that we hear in the Church of England quite frequently, that basically it's okay to have sort of completely different and polarizing and even contradictory points of view because we're all part of one church. That's not the way the Apostle Paul sees it, and I don't really think it's the way Christ saw it or would see it either. Christ doesn't say he's come to bring unity at all costs. He says he's come to cause division, and he uses that image of even those most intimate family relations division between mother and father, division between father and son, and so on. Why? Because of Christ. Because one is a follower of Christ. One believes in Christ and one doesn't. And of course, you can see this in many ways in our world today. Obviously, many families in the secular world are estranged and have problems because they have Christians and secular materialist atheist types within their family. But you see this, of course, in the Islamic world when people convert to Christianity, and it causes massive division, even danger between family members. So what Christ says is true here, and I guess the application, or maybe this is something I'll say when I preach on this, the application is that we should be prepared for this. We should be prepared for the division that following Christ will inevitably bring. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to suffer the cost? Are we willing to count the cost of following Christ? Are we willing to be divided from others as a result of our allegiance to him? And this isn't to say that we should seek division. I think completely opposite. The Apostle Paul says, I have become all things to all people that I might save some so they might come to know Christ. We should do everything that we can to remain at peace with other people, including people in our own family. But when it comes to it, sometimes it's not possible, not because of what we do, but because of other people's attitude and because they reject Christ in general and they reject Christ in us in particular. So that's the way I would put that. Anyway, there we go. There's a bit about the gospel there. Let's move on to some stories. Now, this is the first episode we've done for a couple of weeks now. So really, I'm catching up on a couple of things. Some of these stories might be a little bit old, but I don't think this one is. I think this is kind of current. So this was in an interview that Kemi Badenoch, who is the leader of the Conservative Party for now, gave about various different things. Now, one of the things that's been said about Kemi Badenoch is that she kind of shoots from the hip, and she's not really spun maybe as some politicians. And in a sense, I think that's not a bad thing, but and I quite like it. But I think the way she does it is often comes across as quite naive, and maybe is not necessarily going to serve her particularly well. Is this one of these instances? I think from a political perspective, I can't really see how it helps Kemi Badenoch to say stuff like this, because it obviously doesn't endear her to Christians or religious types. And I'm not sure how it would play well with a traditional Tory base. I'm not sure. But anyway, before we get into the analysis, let's read what she said. Kemi Badenoch, the Daily Mail reports, lost her faith in God over the horrific case of Austrian sex offender Joseph Fritzl, the Tory leader has revealed. In an interview with the BBC, of course, Mrs. Badenoch said she was never that religious while growing up, but believed in God and would define herself as a Christian apologist. Now, that in itself is quite a strange thing to say. And it makes you think, does she understand what a Christian apologist is? Because if you're not religious and yet you're a Christian apologist, then what does that mean? You're an apologist for something you don't really believe in, you're not particularly committed to. Or maybe when she says religious, she means it in that kind of, evangelical sense, that I'm not religious, I've got faith, man. Maybe that's what she means, I'm not sure. But this changed in 2008 so how old was she in 2008? I mean, how old is she now? She's like maybe 45? So she was maybe like in her late 20s? This is quite shocking. But this changed in 2008 when she read reports that Fritzl had imprisoned and repeatedly raped his daughter Elizabeth in his basement for 24 years. Mrs. Badenoch, whose grandfather was a Methodist minister, told Amal Rajan, I couldn't stop reading this story. I read how she prayed every day to be rescued, and I thought I was praying for all sorts of stupid things and was getting my prayers answered. I was praying for good grades and for the bus to come on time. Why were my prayers answered and not this woman's? It was like someone blew out a candle. But she insisted that while she had rejected God, she had not rejected the religion and remained a cultural Christian, adding that she wanted to protect certain Christian values. During her interview, due to be broadcast tonight, Mrs. Badenoch said, that was several nights ago, I assume, Mrs. Badenoch said her tenure as leader was going well. I don't think it is really. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I really don't think it is. In an apparent dig at Nigel Farage's Reform UK, she said there are pretenders. We're the only party on the centre right and the only ones who still believe in values like making sure the government is not getting involved in everything, so it can focus on things like securing our borders. Yeah, does anyone really believe that the Tories are interested in doing that? They had 13 years. It's kind of, yeah, it's not very convincing, is it? She went on to argue that parents worried about their children getting snatched had created a generation that lacked the resilience to face life's problems. Again, I don't know if that seems to me like politically like quite a naive thing to say, isn't it? Because what I read there is, people who are worried about their children being snatched by illegal immigrants need to get some resilience. I mean, that's the way I'm reading that anyway. That's not going to play well with the base. Badenoch then responded to figures suggesting a quarter of people aged 16 to 24 said they had a mental disorder, saying, I think that they have a mental disorder. I don't think they all have a... Oh, wait. I think they have a mental disorder. I don't think they all have a mental disorder. Okay, fair enough. Probably true. Now, let's go to the area where actually, would be more sort of qualified, as it were, like professionally, let's say, to talk about this stuff. Now, essentially, Badenoch is saying that she lost her faith because of what we'd call in the trade, as it were, the problem of evil. Now, the problem of evil is essentially, if you're going to formulate it philosophically, you'd say there's an all-powerful and all-loving God, but there are terrible things that happen in the world. And this doesn't really seem to make sense. So some part of that must not be true. Some people say, well, God's not all powerful then. He'd like to stop things happening, but he can't. Some people say, well, God doesn't love the world. He doesn't really care if we suffer, which is that could be a legitimate point of view. Maybe a deist might think that. And some people just say, well, there is no God at all, and suffering is nothing to do with God because God doesn't exist. Suffering is a byproduct of the evolutionary process or whatever it might be. Now, here it's articulated in the context of prayer, where she's essentially highlighting what she believes is an incongruity, which is that if there were a God, I'm just trying to formulate her argument because it's not a particularly brilliant argument, to be honest, but if there were a God, he would answer all prayers equally. She believed that God answered her prayers to get the bus on time. But then there was another person who wasn't having her prayers answered. And therefore, God wasn't really answering her prayers at all because he doesn't exist. Because if he existed, he would have helped this woman. Now, as a kind of argument, doesn't make any logical sense. She's just talking about a kind of existential crisis. The actual argument there is the problem of evil. It's, well, if there were a God, he wouldn't allow these things to happen, and he would certainly answer. If there were a loving God, if the Christian God were real, then he would rescue people like Elizabeth Fritzl. So that's kind of the argument there. Now, what do we say about the problem of evil? I mean, John Milbank actually had a really good tweet. I've just got into an argument with him about. I keep on getting into arguments with him about global warming, and I can see that there are loads of replies since I accused him of confirmation bias because he keeps on going on about how hot it is and how it's global warming. Now, he made a comment about Badenoch. Oh, he tweets so much I cannot find it. But he articulated like the problem of evil issue very well. I'm not going to be able to find it, but I think the just see if I can. No, I can't. I think he's just tweeted about how dogs have replaced children in Italy. Dreadful. We need way fewer dogs and way more European children. Yeah, but John, that's the global warming. That's the climate change lunacy, isn't it? They're anti-natalist. Anyway, never mind. That's the kind of thing I tweet and then he'd reply, and I'd find it really stressful. The issue with the problem of evil is philosophically quite simple. It's that God created everything good, but he also created certain types of beings with free will, or at least the freedom to choose good or evil. Those beings are us, human beings, but they're also angelic beings as well. And unfortunately, both certain angelic beings and human beings have rebelled against God, sinned against him, and now evil, suffering, death, sin, and so on, have intruded upon God's ontologically good creation and have marred it. But those things are, as I say, they're intruders. They are palimpsests upon that's as it were, sort of covering over the ontological goodness of creation, and they have been comprehensively conquered in Christ, and they will be comprehensively banished from God's good creation at the eschaton, at the end of all things. And if I were to make a suggestion about if you want to read something really good on this, I would recommend David Bentley Hart's book, The Doors of the Sea, because it's a fantastic statement of this, and it doesn't in any way gloss over the issue of real human suffering. But the thing that Hart says in that book, which I think is correct, is that this is actually about spiritual vision, this problem. It's about whether or not you can see past the horrendous and terrible suffering that people face in this life. Lots of people, maybe the majority of human beings who've ever lived, but in certain cases, suffering which seems to be just absolutely overwhelming beyond any description, such as the suffering of this young woman. The Doors of the Sea is about the terrible tsunami, which where was it? I'm trying to remember which tsunami it was. Where was God in? It's just called Where Was God in the Tsunami? I forget which tsunami it was. Was it in the East Indian Ocean? Anyway, it was about a tsunami which killed, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed villages, towns, killed, thousands and thousands of children, and so on and so forth. So, what do you do with that? You can either allow that suffering to overwhelm your vision of God and of the spiritual realm, or you can develop a spiritual vision that can at least conceive of the reality of God, even in and through the reality of suffering and evil. And so ultimately it's like a spiritual question. Can you have faith? Can you have a vision through which the existence of God and his goodness and the reality of the original goodness of creation persists? Or do you lose that vision altogether and just accept that suffering and evil are, or let's just say suffering, because evil's trickier, suffering is just a brute fact which we have to deal with as a result of the evolutionary process? Now, obviously, I think the former. I'm not saying that makes it easy to just look past the suffering of people like Elizabeth Fritzl. It was her name, yeah, Elizabeth Fritzl. But that is the only way of approaching it from a spiritual perspective. You cannot, in my view, try and justify this through some kind of providential schema where God planned this, or it was his will that this woman was imprisoned in a basement and raped repeatedly by her father for 24 years. That is incongruous with the vision of the Christian God. One of the quotes in that book, which I think I may have quoted on this podcast before, David Bentley Hart says, "When I see the face of a dying child, I do not see the face of God, but I see the face of his enemy." And that is correct, in my opinion. This man, Joseph Fritzl, is an enemy of God, and whatever demonic powers inspired him to do this to his daughter are enemies of God as well. This is not an expression of the will of God. This is an expression of the will of Satan, and it is expressly against the will of God that things like this should happen to innocent people, to children, to women, to whomever. It's the face of the enemy of God, not of God himself. That's the way I would articulate an answer to this. Now, some people have said it demonstrates, I think Fergus Butler-Galley said this in The Spectator, it demonstrates a certain lack of intellectual curiosity on the part of Badenoch and a certain amount of superficiality, that she allowed that to blow out whatever faith the candle of whatever faith she had, particularly when she's described herself as a Christian apologist, because the problem of evil is probably number one on the list of things that Christian apologists should have some kind of answer for. So it does come across as, particularly if she was in her late 20s, because this was in 2008, unless she's significantly younger than I think she is. But in 2008, she must have been, I mean, she must be older than me. I'm 38 and I was 20 in 2008, 21. So she would have been an adult whenever she came to this conclusion. And it does seem somewhat infantile intellectually. And it does sort of speak to the fact that many of our politicians are just intellectual midgets, let's put it like that. So I don't mean to be rude to midgets mainly. But they are. They don't really, yeah, I'm not sure really how many books they read or really whether they are acquainted with certain really important intellectual topics such as theology in this case, but economics and politics, ironically, and many other things as well. There are exceptions. Danny Kruger is obviously an exception. He's he's got a doctorate. He's a very well-read man. I've had him on the show interviewing him about his very good book Covenant. And there may be one or two others as well, but there aren't very many. And this, the leader of the Tory party is, she's not an intellectual giant. Let's put it this way. Let's just get to this other comment here. She insisted that while she had rejected God, she had not rejected the religion and remained a cultural Christian, adding that she wanted to protect certain Christian values. Now, that's really interesting. And I talk about this in my book, The Great Return, released a few months ago, published by Hodder and Stoughton. Please buy it on Amazon or wherever. Eden Books, The Great Return, Why Only a Restoration of Christianity Can Save Western Civilization. Now, I think that there is a place for cultural Christianity, and there's a place for people who support cultural Christianity, who want to promote Christianity as a beneficial force in society without actually believing in its metaphysical tenets themselves. I don't think that that's a completely incoherent viewpoint for somebody to have. Say you for certain intellectual reasons or whatever, you couldn't believe in God or you couldn't believe in the Christian religion, but you said, actually, I can see how our society is based on Christianity, and I can see the consequences of departing from it. So I think we should promote it, even though I don't personally believe in it. You could say I believe in its values, I just don't believe in its metaphysics. I would agree with that, and I would say that's a good conclusion to come to if you really can't believe in it. However, I think if you really don't have much belief in it at all as a culture, I think inevitably you can't have the fruit without the root. And I think, well, the root is faith. The root is actual faith, by which I mean faith in Christ, relationship with Christ, and belief in the metaphysical picture of the Christian story. If you don't believe in that, eventually that will play out. The consequences of widespread unbelief will play out in society. They just will. It's just inevitable, because people will start asking themselves, well, if I really don't believe that there's a God, I really don't believe there's such a thing as good and evil, why would we uphold, those views? Why would we instantiate those views in society? Really, surely people should be able to do what they like. Surely people should be freed from the constraints of morality and so on and so forth, which of course we've seen playing out, especially over the last 60 years. So I think if you have people who are, individual instances of, well, I can't believe in God, I can't believe in Christianity, but nevertheless, I think it's a good thing in society and I'd like to promote it, even though I don't personally believe it. Yes, but if that unbelief is too widespread, I don't think it's sustainable. And I'm not sure about this label of like being a cultural Christian. I'm not sure what that really means, to be honest with you. Anyway, so that's it. That's a bit of a theological commentary on what Badenoch said. Yeah, whether it will play well, whether it's actually kind of sustainable, I'm not sure. I mean, my view on the politics of this is that Badenoch is not going to last very long. I just don't think she's got what it takes, really in any way. But does anyone else? I mean, that's the question. I think the Tories are doomed. Basically, they're pretty doomed, and that's just the way it goes. Right now, another story which came up yesterday, so this is quite current. So this is about the BBC, but it's also about Krish Kandaya. Now, I was aware of Krish Kandaya already because Krish Kandaya, he's a refugee charity founder. He's also an evangelical leader. He's a leader in the evangelical world. So he's a Christian, he also was involved in, I think it was a charity. I'm not sure, but basically he promotes like adopting children. And I've been aware of him on Twitter. I think he's one of these evangelical types who started off, quite orthodox in his theology, and maybe he still is, I don't know. But you just see him gradually getting woker and woker as time goes on. And here you just have a kind of full statement of his wokery. So it's about him, but it's also about the BBC. So the BBC they've been forced to drop a Thought for the Day segment on the Today programme, in which Krish Kandaya accused Robert Jenrick of xenophobia over his stance on illegal immigration. So Robert Jenrick, the Tory minister. Kandaya said the Shadow Justice Secretary had fueled fear of the stranger by saying illegal immigrants made him fearful for his daughter's safety. So you're not allowed to say that, according to Kandaya. He said the technical name for this is xenophobia. So he's calling Jenrick a xenophobe. Have we got? I'm trying to see if I can find a recording of this. There was one on here, but I can't find it now. I don't think we really need to listen to it anyway. I think we know what it will sound like. Oh yeah, and here we are. Let's listen to it. I'll just get the sound up here. And you see, this is the thing. It's just me doing this. You can tell how authentic this is because it's just me sort of clicking stuff on my computer, and I don't have a producer or anything like that. It's just the Frank man, Rev'd J Franklin, just doing this all by myself. So let's listen to a bit of Kandaya and see what he has to say about Jenrick.
Page story in the Mail on Sunday quoted Shadow Justice Minister Robert Jenrick talking about his fears for his young daughters. He said, "I certainly don't want my children to share a neighbourhood with men from backward countries who broke into Britain illegally and about whom we know next to nothing." These words echo a fear many have absorbed. Fear of the stranger. The technical name for this is xenophobia.
I mean, is xenophobia fear of the stranger? I think xenophobia is like hatred or discrimination towards people from another country. I don't think it's technically right what he's saying, and it's typically unnuanced, obviously, because I think the worst you could say about what Jenrick said there is when he just described other countries as backward. I mean, that's not particularly politically correct. I do think some countries are backward and less civilized. I mean, you could put it like that. You could say some countries are less civilized than others, and what sensible person would deny that? Maybe the word backward is slightly strong, but basically what Kandaya is doing is what all leftists do when this issue comes up, is they just dismiss the concerns of people who live in this country, and they imply that these people are bigoted or that they're at least ignorant, and that they are sowing fear and discord where it's unnecessary. They don't say there's some legitimacy in these concerns. They don't even say that. They just say, well, these people are xenophobic. And this is, of course, what Kandaya has said here. Jenrick hit back at Mr. Kandaya, writing on X. On BBC Radio 4 this morning, listeners were told that if you're concerned about the threat of illegal migrants to your kids, you're racist. Wrong. You're a good parent. The BBC later withdrew the entire Today programme, during which the comments were made from its on-demand BBC sound service. Too late, BBC. The station's head of editorial standards apologised to Mr. Jenrick, saying the references to xenophobia would be edited out before it was reinstated. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's already happened. When are you going to learn, BBC? Speaking on Wednesday morning, Kandaya made reference to a newspaper article, blah, blah, blah. We just heard that. It followed protests outside migrant hotels, including in Epping, where an Ethiopian asylum seeker was charged with sexually assaulting a schoolgirl days after arriving in Britain, which he denies. Kandaya said, I've read that, Kandaya, who has previously appeared on programmes including BBC Breakfast, News 24, went on to say that all phobias were, by definition, irrational, but nevertheless had a huge impact. Now, I haven't actually listened to the whole thing, but if he did say that, then that is an utterly stupid thing to say. I mean, all phobias. I mean, did he actually say all phobias are by definition irrational? I mean, what about a phobia of what would be like a? I mean, it depends on what he's saying, I suppose, because a phobia is just to be afraid of something, right? So like phobos in Greek means to be afraid. So if you were afraid of like, I don't know, afraid of being hit by a car, right? So I live next to one way system. In a sense, I'm afraid of being hit by a car. So do I have a phobia of being hit by a car? If you could say, in a sense, yes. I mean, I suppose you could say technically, if you have a phobia, it's by definition irrational. I suppose that's true, but that's kind of it's begging the question, isn't it, of whether or not it is a phobia in the first place in that case, or whether there's a legitimate fear there that if we do allow unfettered access to our children to grown men from countries from all over the world who don't have similar values to ours, let's say, then maybe that's not a great thing. I don't know. Anyway, he added that it's understandable that many people are scared by the unknown, especially if they've been told illegality and unfairness are part of the story. Again, it's very patronizing, isn't it? It's well, they've been told these things. They're it's understandable that they've been misled because they're naive. They couldn't possibly have come to this conclusion themselves because they've seen their communities changing in certain ways and they're worried about it. However, Kandaya continued, over the past year, xenophobia has fueled angry protests outside hotels housing asylum seekers, deepening divisions in our communities. Yeah, okay. So that's where this is his own political biases coming through, isn't it? It's those people in Epping, they're xenophobic, and that's why they're protesting. That's why they're angry, because they're xenophobic, because they are irrationally afraid of strangers, not because they're children are now living in a far more dangerous environment than they used to because of the existence of these migrant hotels in the middle of their communities. I have to say, I just think Kandaya is just completely blinkered in saying something like that. Kandaya, the founder of refugee charity The Sanctuary Foundation, was speaking a day after the number of Channel migrant crossings passed 50,000 since Sir Keir Starmer took office. He claimed that the majority of people arriving in small boats are found to be genuinely fleeing war, persecution, and famine, circumstances we would never wish on our own families. It's just hard to believe that that's true when they're coming from France. They're not being persecuted in France. There's no war in France. There's no famine in France. They're coming here because because they prefer it to being in Europe, to being in a country in Western Europe. Right. So it's not to say that people who are genuinely fleeing war, persecution, and famine shouldn't be given sanctuary. It's to say that they're all coming here and it's causing problems. He added, the idea that they pose a greater risk to our children than those already within our communities isn't supported by evidence. Most crimes against children are committed not by strangers, but by people they know, often from in their own families or neighborhoods. This argument is just, I've heard other people using this argument. This argument is absolutely inane. So basically he's saying, let's put it like this, there are already dangerous people in this country, so it doesn't matter if we let other dangerous people in. I mean, what kind of logic is that? Or there are people in this country who are more dangerous, and there are more of them, so why don't we let fewer dangerous people and people who are slightly less dangerous into the country? It is a completely nonsensical argument. Most crimes against children are committed not by strangers, but by people they know. Therefore, let's expose our children to strangers who may be maybe slightly less likely to molest them or rape them than members of their own family. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, this argument. When you think about what's being said, it's so outrageous. People who are genuinely concerned about this stuff, they're concerned that, in the case of Epping, that you have men from other countries, from very, very different countries, who are culturally extremely different, being housed in hotels in the middle of what used to be a leafy, middle-class, wealthy community where their children could be safe. Now there's a hotel filled with men from Ethiopia just outside their door, and these men are literally sexually assaulting their children. right? You can't just say, oh well, that's fine because actually, most child abuse is carried out by family members, so it's actually not so bad for that reason. It makes absolutely no sense. It's such a kind of bizarre argument to say, well then, let's not protect the kids because they're already at risk from their own family members. Anyway, it's crazy. On Wednesday afternoon, Roger Mahoney, the head of editorial standards for the BBC Radio 4, wrote to Mr. Jenrick to apologise. He said that following discussion of the programme with the production team, I've concluded that while its reflection on fear in society from a faith perspective is broadly in line with expectations of thought for the day, some of the language it used went beyond that. Mahoney added, I've asked for the 2 references to xenophobia to be edited from the programme on BBC Sounds. Please accept my apology for the original inclusion. A bit about thought for the day. Tim Pemberton, the head of BBC Religion and Ethics at BBC Audio North, is understood to provide the final approval on scripts before broadcast. Think maybe his head's going to roll. Maybe, don't know. Who knows what will happen to him? He'll probably get away with it. So we're talking here about Mr. Pemberton has held a number of senior roles at the broadcaster, including managing editor of BBC Radio Gloucester. He studied philosophy and religious studies at Lancaster University and was involved in the BBC's coverage of blah, 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 who cares. BBC spokesman said, while its reflection on fear and... We've already read this bit. Why have they put this bit in twice? I mean, this is the Telegraph, for goodness sake. Richard Tice. What is wrong with journalists? Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform UK, said, it wasn't thought for the day. It was delusion of the day. Very good. The British people are sick of paying to import a combination of economic opportunists, drug dealers, criminals, misogynists, and men from inferior cultures to our own, where their views of women are borderline medieval. Now, I like that, except that thing about medieval. The medieval culture in the West was far more sophisticated in many ways than our own culture. It's much more Christian. And I hate this thing of people saying medieval culture is backward because it very much wasn't. So I don't like that, Richard Tice. That was not good at the end, but the rest of it was really good. He should have said, inferior cultures to our own, where their views of women are, I don't know, derogatory, harmful, and dangerous, or something like that. You don't have to drag the medieval period into it. Read my book, The Great Return, particularly the chapter called History. A Tory source said, thought for the day has long descended into a bunch of nobodies. This is good. a bunch of nobodies wittering on about their mad hat socialist ideas. If the BBC are not prepared to broadcast serious religious voices, they should at least ensure the second-rate ones they do find are balanced. Ouch! That's a burn there on Krish Kandaya. You see what's being said? It's being said that he is a second-rate voice and he's unbalanced. He's an unbalanced second-rate voice. Goodness gracious me. That's a burn, isn't it? Why doesn't the Tory source identify himself? Because, there's nothing to be ashamed of. You should own that comment. It's a really good one. Serious religious voices. We want serious religious voices on Radio 4. Who would constitute a serious religious voice? Tell me in the comments below. Send me an email at revdpod@gmail.com. Tell me who would constitute a serious religious voice. And if you say Jamie Franklin and the folks, the Revs at a Reverend, you get special credit, of course. Who's a serious religious voice? I don't know. It's hard to say nowadays, isn't it? It's hard to say. Even Rowan Williams, I wouldn't put him on thought for the day because he might say something mad about climate change and how we have to, dress up as pagans and parade around with various leaders from other religions, which is what he's been doing recently. Who would you say? Who's a serious religious voice? Honestly, I don't know. I just don't know anymore. Where are the public intellectual Christians who actually speak in a way which is reasonable, sensible, and theologically and philosophically sophisticated and deep? Where are they? I don't know. In this country, anyway. I can maybe think of some internationally, but honestly, it really is shocking. It really is shocking. And the fact that, they just trot out these people who just come out with their, the same nonsense over, somebody described this as something like a socialist nostrum or something like that. And that's exactly what it is. It takes almost no thought. I mean, he's trying to couch it, Kandaya, in all this kind of psychological language and everything, trying to sound deep. But really, the fact is it's just more of this kind of regurgitated nonsense that the left comes out with. It's not sophisticated analysis of the situation. It's not acknowledging the genuine concerns that people have about what is going on in this country. And they're not only genuine concerns, they're very serious concerns on a demographic level. And we've spoken about this before. If anyone of any sense would recognize this, would actually pay attention to this and wrestle with the very real issue of demographic change in Britain. I've spoken about this before on this podcast. I wrote about it a bit in the book, but subsequently learned much more about it. By the end of this century, if this continues, if immigration continues in this way and the birth rate continues in this way in Britain, by the end of the century, 1 in 4 people will be a Muslim. 1 in 3 under 40 will be a Muslim. By the middle of this century, white Britons are going to be a minority in this country. So that's what the future holds, right? So if you don't want Britain to become a Muslim country, then something has to change. People have to start having more children. Immigration needs to be massively curtailed. Now, there may be many people who don't care if Britain becomes a Muslim nation, but I do, because I'm a Christian and because I don't want to live in a Muslim nation. I don't want my grandchildren to live under Sharia law. I don't want my granddaughters or even my daughter to have to garb themselves in the hijab. But that's what's going to happen. We're going to become like Iran if things carry on. And you might say, well, what's the problem with that? And I would say, well, just look at Iran and just tell me if you want to live in that country. Tell me if that's the country you want to live in. If it is, then we'll continue with the immigration policy that we have and for the policies around families that we have, because that's where we're going. That's what's so frustrating about this, is it's just intellectually and philosophically and theologically banal beyond description. People like Kandaya, they just surround themselves with other people who have exactly the same views as they do, and so when they actually come out into public and just air these views, which are constantly reinforced by all the people that in their social milieu, people who actually see things differently are frustrated by it, because they are so utterly trivial and superficial and dismissive of people's actual lives and experiences. So there you go. That's what I think about that. Happy to hear any comeback on any of that. Now I've used quite a lot of time, and so let's just go on to a few more things. So Bernard Randall, who's a very nice man, a priest. I know him personally. He was blacklisted for doing a sermon at a chapel. He was a chaplain at Nottingham College, actually just down the road from where I used to live, in Nottingham, at Trent College in Derbyshire. And he was referred to counter-terrorism programme Prevents, and he was basically fired for the sermon. What did the sermon say? The sermon was responding to an anonymous question from one of the students, which was about why do we have to swallow all this LGBT stuff. It was a completely measured sermon in which he basically said, if you don't want to, if you're an Anglican, you should, or a Christian, you could evaluate it according to the tenets of your faith or something like that. It was just that, basically. It was a completely normal, completely reasonable sermon to give, and in some ways actually quite tame. Timid. He didn't actually give his own opinion or anything like that. So anyway, so he was fired, but he's also been blacklisted by the Church of England as a safeguarding risk, essentially. And I think the issue is technically he doesn't have PTO, which is permission to officiate, as a result. So he can't get a job as a priest. Last I knew, and Bernard listens to the show, so please tell me, Bernard, if this is wrong, but he was working for the Open University. He's got a doctorate in history. He's a very, very clever man. So I won't read all of this, but I'll leave a link to the update on Christian Concern. But there was a bit about what was said in General Synod this month, because there have been various tribunals, various appeals about Bernard still being called a safeguarding risk by the Church of England. At General Synod this month, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, was asked, that's the governing body of the Church of England, by the way, in the light of the treatment of the Rev'd Dr Bernard Randall, can the bishops confirm that teaching Church of England doctrine on marriage in the place of sexual intimacy is not a safeguarding risk? Can you say that? I mean, in a very straightforward way, if somebody asked me that question, I would say, why would teaching our own doctrine constitute a safeguarding risk? What does the Archbishop of York say, the most senior cleric in the church at the moment? The House of Bishops has not considered this particular case or the specific question asked. That's interesting. But don't you have the intelligence? Don't you have the theological conviction just to answer that yourself and say, of course it doesn't? Apparently not. After Dr. Randall pursued legal action over the blacklisting a year ago, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had little choice but to have Derby Diocese review all its safeguarding procedures, and for the process that led to the blacklisting of Randall commenced again from scratch by a person who are independent of the diocese. A legal review of Randall's complaint by Gregory Jones KC and Dame Sarah Asplin found that the church's handling of the case was egregious, flawed, and highly unsatisfactory. The Archbishop was told that this had been plainly wrong, and that, what does it say? He was plainly wrong. So the ABC was plainly wrong, had misdirected himself, and had misunderstood the scope of his powers after he said there was no disciplinary case for the Bishop of Derby to answer over the process which led to the blacklisting. 6 years after the sermon's given, Randall hasn't been instated. CofE's dragged its feet. Rather than restart the safeguarding process from scratch, they only went back one step and continued without presenting any evidence. As part of the new safeguarding process, a meeting was held in June with independent CofE safeguarding advisor Lee Elliott and Bishop of Repton, Reverend Malcolm McNaughton, the Bishop of Derby's deputy. The purpose of the meeting was for the CofE to put their allegations to Randall and allow him to provide a formal response. Although this meeting is a basic part of church safeguarding processes, Randall had to request it repeatedly. Bishop Malcolm read a statement to Dr. Randall where it was claimed Dr. Randall remains at risk based on what he might say in future sermons. I mean, that is absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Absurd. It was suggested his sermons and beliefs could cause emotional and spiritual harm. I mean, what ridiculous nonsense. I go back to Luke 12, I've not come to bring peace, but rather division. I've come to cast fire upon the earth. It's just disgraceful. When pressed for evidence and justification for this, Mr. Elliott cited a now overturned employment tribunal ruling that had been declared unsafe due to anti-Christian bias. Following the statement read to him, Randall asked what the nature of the alleged abuse is and who the victim is. Mr. Elliott said, "There is no named victim. The school has not supplied that." Dr. Randall asked, "So how do we know there is a victim?" Mr. Elliott also referred to Dr. Randall's Christian beliefs as your views. Randall responded by saying that his sermon reflected official Church of England doctrine, not personal opinion. "These are not my views, they are the teachings of the Church of England," he said. Mr. Elliott said, "My understanding is that there are different parts of the Church of England that have different views and beliefs around the various sexual orientations." Well, then surely that means that Randall's is one of them, and why is it illegitimate? Anyway, he then further claimed that saying things that are controversial could significantly lead to harm. I mean, who are these idiots? Like, who is this guy, Mr. Elliott? Where is it? Lee Elliott. CofE, independent CofE safeguarding advisor Lee Elliott. Saying things that are controversial could significantly lead to harm. So saying controversial things is a safeguarding risk because it could lead to harm. It's just absolutely absurd. Did Christ ever say anything controversial? Did the Apostle Paul? Did any of the church fathers ever say anything controversial? They must have all been safeguarding risks as well. Did the prophet Isaiah, did the prophet Jeremiah say anything that was controversial? When challenged on how controversial views could be a safeguarding issue, Mr. Elliott brought the discussions to an abrupt close. Mr. Elliott also went on to record on the record as not answering questions. Anyway, so it just carries on like this. And then Bernard makes a long statement, which I won't read now, but I'll put on the show notes. But I mean, it is absolutely appalling what's happened to Bernard Randall. Absolutely appalling. And everyone involved in it should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves. Pathetic, appalling, unjust, ungodly, unprincipled, and cowardly, and cruel as well. Cruel to Bernard, all the suffering he's been through over the last 6 years, just because he wouldn't bow the knee to the LGBTQ ideology that his own church has persecuted him and caused such suffering to him and his family and to those who are around him. It's absolutely shocking and disgraceful. So An update on the selection for the Archbishop of Canterbury. I'm not feeling positive about this, by the way, just so you know. The shortlist of candidates for the next Archbishop of Canterbury has been agreed by the Canterbury Crown Nominations Committee. I didn't know it was called the Canterbury Crown Nominations. I thought it was just called the Crown's Nomination Committee. Anyway, but the names of those considered have not been made public. Boring. In an interview last month, the chair of the CNC, Lord Evans, said that he preferred the term confidentiality to secrecy when talking about the way in which the CNC operates, and said that it would help the Commission reach the right point. Lord Evans, who is a former head of MI5 and a crossbench peer in the Church of Lords, described the process as one of discernment rather than straightforward selection. It's had 3 meetings since the end of May. A final meeting will be held towards the end of September. If the CNC can achieve the 2/3 majority required for a nomination, that name will probably be made public in early October. So only another 2 months to wait. CNC's got 17 voting members. The Archbishop of Canterbury's and the Prime Minister's appointments secretaries also attend the meetings, as does the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion, the Right Reverend Anthony Pogo. In addition to Lord Evans, the voting members are the Archbishop of York and the Bishop of Norwich, the Right Reverend Graham Usher, representing the northern and southern provinces, 6 members elected from the General Synod, 5 from the Anglican Communion, and 3 from the Diocese of Canterbury. The Canterbury Tales. So we don't actually learn anything really, apart from that we've got a couple of months to wait. In other Archbishop news, let's say in Wales, the new Anglican Archbishop of Wales is a lesbian and is in a relationship with another lesbian, no less. Her name is Bishop Cherry Van. In a move likely to reverberate around far beyond Welsh borders, Bishop Cherry Van of Monmouth, lovely area Monmouth, has been elected Archbishop of Wales, marking an unprecedented chapter in Anglican history. At 66, she becomes both the first woman to hold a post in the United Kingdom and the first openly LGBTQ plus leader of the Church in Wales. A choice controversy waits. What? What does that mean? It says LGBTQ plus leader of the Church in Wales, and then there's a dash and it says a choice controversy wait as the institution confronts recent wounds over safeguarding and governance failures. Terrible English, don't understand what it means. This is the Zenit website. Her election on August the 6th followed 2 days of closed-door deliberations by an electoral college of clergy and lay representatives near Chepstow. Very nice. The decision comes barely 2 months after the abrupt resignation of Archbishop Andy John, blah, blah, blah. Van's rise is all the more striking for the timing. The Church of England is in the midst of selecting a new ABC to succeed Welby, blah, blah, blah. A Leicestershire native, Van trained at the Royal College of Music before entering Theological College in 1986. She was among the first women ordained in the Church of England in 1994, went on to be Archdeacon of Rochdale, and then she was appointed Bishop of Monmouth in 2020. Rowan Williams was the Archbishop of Monmouth as well, I remember. Her public support for the Open Table Network, an ecumenical community for LGBTQ plus Christians and allies, reflects a pastoral style rooted in inclusion, listener, inclusion. She shares her home with her civil partner and their 2 dogs. So lots of inclusion there. They're all included. Cherry Van, civil partner, and the 2 dogs. That openness will not be without controversy in the global Anglican Communion, where divisions over sexuality remain acute, blah, blah, blah. So there's all that kind of stuff there. Then there's a little bit more. There's a biased article on the BBC website. I didn't even really talk about BBC bias earlier, did I? And that whole thing about, what was it about now? Oh yeah, about Kandaya, but they are very biased. The Church of Wales said it will not respond to criticism of Cherry Van's sexuality following her election as Archbishop of Wales. The Global Fellowship of Confessing Anglicans, GAFCON, which represents conservative views, some people might just say Christian views, described her appointment as another painful nail in the coffin of Anglican orthodoxy. A chaplain representing the LGBTQ plus community, such a mouthful, isn't it? Community in Wales said they were saddened but not surprised by the statement. Bishop Van said to the BBC that the church should represent the diversity that is in our communities. Should it? Or should it preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations? I'll let you decide, listener. I'm just suggesting it. Reacting to her appointment, Dr. Laurent Mbanda, chairman of GAPCON and Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Rwanda, said that the church had bowed to worldly pressures that subvert God's good words. There we go. And then there's a number of sort of passive-aggressive comments by people in the Church of Wales that follow. So that's that. I mean, obviously, it's very sad. I mean, the Church in Wales is a very minor church nowadays. Let's just check this. So how many congregants on a Sunday are there in the church in Wales? I mean, this number is really small. I didn't check this beforehand, but this number is actually very, very small. So the most recent data is sparse, but a 2017 report noted a 15% decline in average Sunday attendance for adults over 5 years, suggesting that number may have dropped further, potentially to around 24,000 to 25,000 people in 2017. So in 2015, it was 29,000. Now it's between 24 and 25,000 people. So really, you're talking about like the size of like maybe 2 or 3 dioceses in England. So it's a really small church, and it's going to get smaller, isn't it? Let's face it, because they've utterly departed from the gospel and from the scriptures and from the tradition. So that's what's going to happen to them because they are doing this. Now, another story, and this is again, it's another sad story, really. It's all just sadness, endless sadness, apart from Christ and the gospel, which is our hope, isn't it? But Spurgeon's College, which is a Baptist theological college that was actually founded by Charles Haddon Spurgeon, the famous Baptist preacher, is going to close immediately. And this is because they struggle to attract enough students, and it's essentially for financial reasons. So it's very sad. I mean, there are various things that have happened to make this possible. To make this an actuality, this sad situation. Various things have happened to put the nail in the coffin, but essentially it's the same story that there is everywhere, which is decline in the church leads to less people training, leads to less money for the theological colleges, leads to lower numbers at congregations, leads to less money in churches, and so on. So it's a kind of vicious circle that the Baptist church is apparently in the same way as the Church of England is as well. But it is very sad because Spurgeon has a kind of legendary status within the Baptist world. And Spurgeon said and thought lots of things that I just wouldn't agree with at all. Nevertheless, he was an extremely great man, and he saw amazing fruit in his ministry. And part of that fruit was the training college. So that is sad, and it is a sign of further decline in our nation. Interesting, in the article in the Church Times, it says, in the General Synod last month, a question from Rev'd Dr Christopher Landau, who I know personally, I've met him before, a nice chat with him, revealed that the number of CofE ordination candidates entering residential training colleges fell from, this is crazy, from 218 to 65 in the decade to 2024. So just to elaborate on that, to clarify that means in 2014 there were 218 people entering residential training colleges, so to train residentially. That changed from 218 to 65 in that 10-year period. So there's a decline of, well, that's like 75%, isn't it? So we have a quarter entering residential training colleges now to the amount there were in 2014. 7 of the 10 colleges had fewer than 10 new students at the beginning of the last academic year. And actually, one of them, my college, had 1 new residential student. I think it was 1 new residential student in 2014. When I went, which was in 2018, there were like 15 or something like that. So, yeah, it's not just the it's not just the Baptist Church and the Church in Wales, which is undergoing this kind of decline. It's absolutely everywhere. And as I say, it's a vicious cycle because if you don't have people, you could start the cycle anyway, but let's just say if you don't have people training, then you have, well, fewer people training, you have less money to train them, the quality of the people training isn't as good. In the Church of England, we obviously have people being taught heresy, or not being educated as they should be, not being formed as they should be. Then they're sent out into the churches. They're not, there aren't enough of them to sustain the parishes. And because they haven't been trained very well and not appropriate candidates, they don't do very well. The churches decline. There are fewer people. There's less money. There's a smaller group of people to draw from to train for ordination, and then the cycle just repeats itself. You see how that works. So training is absolutely crucial in the revitalization of the church, because you need priests or vicars or pastors or whatever, ministers, whatever you want to call them. Use whatever word you like, but you need people who know what they're doing to lead churches into growth and to bring about renewal. And if you don't have those people, then you're screwed. And that's the thing that the Church of England, and everywhere, but I think particularly the Church of England, needs to understand. The basic fact is, it doesn't matter how much you try and empower the laity. It doesn't matter how many sort of mission initiatives you start. If you don't have the priests to lead churches into growth, it doesn't matter. It just won't make any difference. You can't have an organization like a parish church grow if it doesn't have somebody to provide overall direction, vision, and leadership. And the only person who can do that in an organization like a parish church is a priest. Just like, in a Premier League football team, you need a manager. If you don't have a manager, then it's chaos. It's the same thing in a parish church. You need priests, and you need priests who are godly, who are properly formed, who are properly educated, so that they have all the skills that they need in order to, obviously with experience, but they have all the skills that they need, plus experience, to lead churches into growth. And that's the problem. That's what we don't have in the Church of England, and it's absolutely crucial. And in some ways, or we largely don't have it. In some ways, that would be, if you were to take over, your first day at the job as Archbishop of Canterbury, what would you do? I think it would be that. I think it would be, right, we need to have a massive recruitment drive, and we need to not just try and get people in, but we need to get quality people in, and we need to improve the quality of their formation and education, because this is where renewal in the church will start from. How do we do it? I've suggested before that I think priests need to be paid more money, because it would give them more security, not because we want to tempt people with filthy lucre, but because we want to get people, we want to make people feel like it's financially viable for them to do such a thing as become a full-time priest in the Church of England. At the moment, it's not financially viable for somebody to have a family, for example, and for their wife not to have a job, homeschool their children, for example. But essentially, you need a two-income family in order to sustain a priest with a family with children. That's not good enough. They need to be paid more money so that they don't have these concerns. Now, I know that there is a slight increase coming, but we need more of that, significantly more, so that priests, and also so that being a priest is seen to be a prestigious role in society. But it doesn't do the church any good to pay priests such rubbish money. And by the way, for people who don't know, I'm not actually paid by the church. I live in a church house, but I'm not paid by the church. So at the moment, I don't have a dog in this fight, or in this race, or whatever it is. But it doesn't do any good, because it makes it look like it's not important. It makes it look like the church isn't important. It makes it look like the priest isn't an important person in the society. Whereas if being a priest was viewed as a more prestigious a more prestigious vocation, such as being a lawyer or a barrister or being a doctor or something like that, that the church would have more respect. It's part of actually promoting a good public image. And people would say, well, why do we want a good public image? And I would go back to the Apostle Paul, who says in 1 Corinthians, I have become all things to all people in order that I might save some, or in order that some might be saved. You've got to play this game in order to get people to come to church, to get people to know Christ. You can't just say, well, we don't care about public perception. You have to care about it, because it's a matter of people coming to know Christ. It's a matter of the gospel. Now, as I was saying earlier, you don't do it in such a way as that you compromise the faith. You don't depart from faithfulness to Christ to do it. But to the extent you can do it, you should do it. And I think the case of paying priests properly is one of these issues where really it needs to change, partly for that reason. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. I've been talking for a long time now. And part of the reason I've been talking a long time is because I haven't only just done this podcast this morning, I've also done another podcast, which is called Uncollared. Now, Uncollared is a conversational podcast, which sometimes me, by myself, sometimes also with my colleagues, Daniel and Tom, where we just chew the fat about all sorts of things. We often take questions from subscribers, and that's the point here, is that the Uncollared podcast is only for people who subscribe to this podcast and who give us a little bit of money in exchange for even more content, such as Uncollared. I also make the episodes early and send them off to subscribers early in the week, and there are occasionally other benefits as well to subscribing, not least that you're actually supporting this podcast. This podcast costs money to make, costs, I would say hundreds of pounds a month to make. And also, I am a writer and a podcaster for my job, as well as being a parish priest, and I live off the income I make from podcasting and writing, essentially. So as well as helping with the overheads of this podcast, you're also directly helping me. And I can tell you it is a massive help. I mean, it really is just so appreciated that people support this podcast and support me. It's an amazing thing. So if you'd like to support the podcast, please do. You'll get our extra bonus audio podcast, Uncollared. Today I spoke about the inspiration of Scripture. I spoke about how to teach children in a Christian manner. I spoke about the mysteries of the Trinity. I spoke about the new interview with Lord Frost. That wasn't the most interesting part of it, to be honest with you. I was just telling people where they could find the link. I spoke about, somebody asked me if he should leave his woke Roman Catholic Church. I gave an answer to that. And I spoke about nations and borders from a Christian perspective. So you get all of that interesting stuff if you just subscribe to the podcast. And the way you do that is you go to our website, revdpod.com, click on the big red button and become a Patreon today. Becoming a patron is a really, really good thing to do. You can also join us on Substack, revdpod.substack.com. All of these links are on the show notes of the episode. You just go there, you become a subscriber. On Patreon, you can do it for as little as £2.50 plus VAT in the UK per month. So we're talking about £3 a month, maybe 10p more than that. £3 a month just to support this podcast, support me, to get the extra content, to get the episodes early, and to get occasional other extra things as well. It's really not very much money at all. And if you've been thinking, I'd love to support Jamie, I'd love to really help him, I'd love to help Daniel and Tom make this podcast, please don't delay. Do it today. Go and get your wallet or your purse, whatever you have, and just please support us. I mean, it makes this podcast viable. It makes what we're doing, what I'm doing, viable for the future. So go to revdpod.com, click on the Patreon button, become a patron today. You can buy us a coffee as well. I'd prefer it if you'd like to make a straightforward donation. I'd prefer if you write to me at revdpod@gmail.com and just do it directly. And you can indeed set up a monthly subscription directly if you'd like to, and I can give you free access to our Substack, which has all the same stuff that the Patreon has. Cuts out the middleman. It means that less of your money goes to a platform, more of it comes to us. So if you'd like to do that, just email me at revdpod@gmail.com. And I will arrange it for you as soon as I possibly can. As soon as I am possibly able, listener, I will arrange it for you. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I was going to do a question to Rev, but to be honest with you, I've kind of run out of time. I'm having to record this a day later than I planned, I should say, because my son was ill yesterday. So I've run out of time and I've got to go and get ready for Mass in a minute. So I can't do the email, but we'll carry it over. It's from Victoria. It's very interesting. It's about the collapse of civilization, man. And we'll get to that next time. So there we go. Whew, so many words. In a multitude of words, there is danger. I think that is a proverb, actually. I know that there's a proverb which talks about not using many words, and that's wise. But something I struggle with, if I'm honest with you. Sometimes I just feel like you need a maximalist approach. You just need to just go for it. The more is more approach. That's the way I feel. Anyway, a word to finish with. The collect from the Book of Common Prayer for this week speaks of the providential ordering of all things, both in heaven and earth, that God providentially orders all things. He allots the times and the places that we live in, as the Apostle Paul puts it in the book of Acts. Things change. Sometimes things get better. Sometimes things get worse. God has his providential hand over all things. He's placed us here and now in this time. Sometimes things feel depressing, sometimes things feel bad, sometimes anxious, sometimes sad, sometimes good. But whatever time we find ourselves in, whatever place we find ourselves in, we can comfort ourselves with the knowledge of God, with the knowledge of the presence of Christ in our lives. And through prayer, we can come to know peace, the peace that passes all understanding in all circumstances. And this is what Christ offers to us. This is what Christ offers to the world, even in the midst of the collapse of the church, even in the midst of civilizational decay and collapse. We have our treasure hidden in the field. We have the pearl of great price. We have this peace in Christ, which endures all things. So, friends, I encourage you not to be depressed, not to be downcast, not to be sad, but to rejoice. Rejoice in Christ above all. So let us pray. O God, whose never failing providence ordereth all things both in heaven and earth, we humbly beseech thee to put away from us all hurtful things, and to give us those things which be profitable for us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Friends, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it, as always, especially to the subscribers out there. Love you. I love you all, but, love the subscribers, especially for their support and their love. Do come back next time. Find out what we'll be talking about next week. Probably a lot of the same kind of stuff, to be honest with you. I think it's been particularly interesting this week. I have to say, I like the stories this week. Got lots of meat to get into there, to get our teeth into. But anyway, God bless you. Until next time, keep watch and keep the faith.